The cabin lights dimmed as Flight 447 leveled off at 37,000 feet, engines humming that low mechanical prayer passengers barely notice anymore. Most were already asleep or absorbed in their screens, but the man in 24B couldn't stop staring. The woman beside him in the window seat hadn't moved in 20 minutes. She sat rigid, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the glass, fingers curled around a paper coffee cup that had long gone cold. Her knuckles were white. He tried small talk during boarding, weather, delays, the usual, but she'd only nodded, polite and distant. Now, watching her from the corner of his eye, he noticed things. The way her jaw tightened when turbulence rattled the fuselage, how her breathing slowed, became measured, deliberate, and the jacket folded on her lap, olive drab with a patch half visible. Wings, a lightning bolt, something else he couldn't make out. He cleared his throat. She didn't respond. Outside, a flicker of light caught his attention. Then another. Two aircraft, sleek and impossibly close, their silhouettes cutting through the moonlit clouds like sharks through deep water. F-22 Raptors. Even he knew that shape. They held formation just off the wing, close enough to see the swept angles of their tails, the predatory cant of their noses. Then slowly, deliberately, both pilots raised their hands to their visors. A salute, held for 3 full seconds. The woman in 24A didn't move, but her eyes glistened. The fighters peeled away, afterburners igniting in twin streaks of blue fire, and vanished into the black. The man in 24B felt his heart hammering. He looked at her, really looked this time, and saw the faint scar tracing her jawline, the way her shoulders carried a weight invisible to everyone else. "What?" he whispered. "What was that?" She turned to him then, and for the first time he saw her face fully. Mid-30s, maybe. Eyes that had seen things he couldn't fathom. She didn't smile, but something softened in her expression, just a fraction. "Old friends," she said quietly. Her voice was rough, like gravel smoothed by years of wind. He wanted to ask more, but the way she looked back out the window told him the conversation was over. Still, his mind raced. Who was she? What had she done to earn a salute from fighter pilots at cruising altitude? And why did she look like she was carrying the weight of ghosts? The flight attendant passed through the cabin with her cart, oblivious. Passengers dozed. The hum of pressurized air continued its monotonous song. But the man in 24B couldn't shake the image. Two of the most lethal aircraft in the sky, their pilots offering respect to a woman in coach. He glanced at the jacket again, and this time, in the dim overhead light, he caught it. Stitched in faded gold thread beneath the wings, Ghost Rider. The name meant nothing to him, but the way she'd reacted when those jets appeared told him everything. This wasn't coincidence. This was recognition. He settled back into his seat, but sleep felt impossible now. The woman beside him had become a mystery, and mysteries like this didn't belong in the quiet boredom of commercial flight. They belonged in stories people told in hushed voices, the kind that started with, "You wouldn't believe what I saw." But he had seen it. And now, more than anything, he needed to know why. She closed her eyes, but her hand never left that jacket. The patch caught the light one more time before she shifted, hiding it beneath the fold. Outside, the sky stretched infinite and black, stars scattered like shrapnel from some cosmic firefight. Somewhere out there, those pilots were returning to base, carrying a story of their own. But hers, he suspected, was longer, darker, and it started long before tonight. The coffee cup slipped from her fingers, empty, and rolled under the seat ahead. She didn't reach for it. Her breathing had evened out, but the tension never left her frame. The man in 24B wanted to respect her space, but curiosity gnawed at him. He was a journalist by trade, freelance, always chasing the story nobody else wanted to tell. And this, whatever this was, had that electric feeling of something real, something important. He pulled out his phone, switched to airplane mode, and opened his notes app. He typed, "Woman, late 30s, military background, call sign Ghost Rider, saluted by F-22 pilots mid-flight." He stared at the words. They looked insane written out like that, but he'd seen it. He'd seen the respect in that gesture, the kind of salute you don't give lightly. Not to someone who just flew planes, to someone who'd done something that mattered. He glanced at her again. Her eyes were still closed, but he could tell she wasn't sleeping. Nobody who sat that still was actually asleep. She was somewhere else, somewhere far from this cabin, maybe years in the past. He wondered what she was seeing behind those eyelids. Deserts, mountains, the flash of missile lock warnings. The flight attendant stopped beside them. "Can I get you anything?" she asked him quietly. He shook his head. She moved on. The woman in 24A didn't stir. Hours passed. The cabin grew colder. Most passengers pulled out blankets, curled into awkward positions, surrendered to sleep. But the woman remained upright, hands folded over that jacket, eyes closed but mind clearly awake. Somewhere over Kansas, the man in 24B finally dozed off, his head resting against the window. When he woke, the sky outside was beginning to pale, the black giving way to deep indigo. The woman was looking out again, watching the dawn creep across the horizon. "You were military," he said quietly. Wasn't a question, she didn't turn. Was. Fighter pilot, a pause, then barely audible, close air support. That explained something. Not fighters chasing glory in dogfights, but the planes that stayed low, that took fire so the soldiers on the ground didn't have to. The ones that came when you were out of options, the ones you prayed for. He guessed, she almost smiled. For a while, then other things. And Ghost Rider, now she did turn, and her eyes held a warning. Not hostile, but firm. "A boundary. Old call sign," she said. "Doesn't mean much now." But it did. He could see it in the way she said it, the weight those two words carried. It meant everything. He wanted to press, but something in her gaze stopped him. This wasn't a story she was ready to tell, maybe not to anyone, maybe not ever. So he nodded and looked away, giving her the space she clearly needed. But his mind wouldn't let it go. Ghost Rider. The name conjured images of something spectral, something that appeared when hope was gone and disappeared just as quickly. A legend. A myth. Except she was real, sitting right there in a coach seat, drinking bad airline coffee and staring out at the sky like it owed her answers. The plane began its descent into Denver. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom with the usual details. Local time, weather, gate information. The cabin stirred to life. Passengers stretching, checking phones, gathering belongings. The woman in 24A finally moved, rolling her shoulders, tucking the jacket into her carry-on with a care that bordered on reverence. The man in 24B gathered his courage. "I'm a journalist," he said quickly before he could second-guess himself. "If you ever want to tell your story, I'd listen. No agenda, no exploitation, just the truth." She zipped her bag slowly, deliberately, then looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not anger, not interest either, something closer to exhaustion. "Some stories don't need telling," she said. "They need burying." The plane touched down, tires screeching against asphalt, and the cabin filled with the usual sounds of arrival. Overhead bins opening, seat belts clicking, the shuffle of impatient people. She stood, pulled her bag from the overhead compartment with practiced ease, and stepped into the aisle. He watched her go, just another passenger in the stream heading toward the exit. But as she passed the cockpit, he saw something. The pilot, an older man with silver hair and the bearing of someone who'd flown for decades, glanced up from his checklist. Their eyes met, and he nodded, just once. A brief dip of the chin, but the respect in it was unmistakable. She returned it, barely perceptible, and kept walking. The man in 24B felt like he'd witnessed something sacred, a silent conversation in a language he didn't speak. He fumbled for his bag and followed at a distance, watching her navigate the terminal with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. She didn't check her phone, didn't stop at the shops, just walked with purpose toward baggage claim. He almost lost her in the crowd, then spotted the jacket slung over her shoulder, that patch with the wings and lightning bolt just visible. Ghost Rider. He had to know. He caught up to her at baggage claim, standing apart from the crowd, arms crossed, watching the carousel with that same distant expression. He hesitated, then approached. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know you said some stories need burying, but I can't stop thinking about what I saw up there. Those pilots, they didn't just salute. They honored you. That means something." She didn't look at him. "Means they remember." Remember what? Now she turned, and for the first time he saw the full weight of whatever she carried. It was in her eyes, in the set of her jaw, in the way she seemed older than her years. "A war most people forgot about," she said quietly. "A valley in Afghanistan nobody can pronounce, and a day that changed everything." The carousel started moving, bags tumbling onto the belt. She spotted hers immediately, a worn green duffel that had seen better days, and pulled it off with one hand. "You want the story?" she asked, slinging the duffel over her shoulder. "Fine, but not here and not now." She started walking toward the exit. He followed, heart pounding. "When?" "You know the Veterans Memorial Park on Colfax," he nodded. "Tomorrow, 1400 hours. Military time, of course. I'll be there," he said. She paused at the automatic doors, the Colorado sun streaming in, bright and harsh. "Bring a recorder," she said. "This isn't a story you write from memory. Too many details, too many names." And then she was gone, disappearing into the sunlight and the stream of travelers, leaving him standing in the terminal with more questions than answers. But he had a lead now. A time, a place, and the beginning of something that felt bigger than a simple human interest piece. He pulled out his phone and started researching. Ghost Rider, close air support, Afghanistan. The search results were sparse at first, mostly generic information about call signs and aircraft. Then he found it, buried in a military forum from 6 years ago, a thread titled "The Ghost Rider of Korengal Valley." He clicked it. The first post was simple. "Anyone remember the A-10 pilot who saved Outpost Restrepo in 2011? Call sign Ghost Rider. Heard she flew through hell and back. Legend says she took hits that should have downed her plane but stayed on station until every soldier was safe. Anyone know what happened to her?" The replies were a mix of second-hand stories, speculation, and a few that claimed to have been there. But one stood out, posted by someone with the username GroundPounder3-7. "I was there. I owe my life to Ghost Rider. She's real. And what she did that day isn't legend. It's fact." He read through the thread 3 times, his pulse quickening with each pass. The details were fragmented, told in the clipped language of soldiers who'd seen combat, but a picture began to emerge. Outpost Restrepo, a remote firebase in the Korengal Valley, one of the most hostile regions in Afghanistan. June 2011. A routine patrol that turned into an ambush. Dozens of insurgents, heavy weapons, coordinated attack. The outpost was about to be overrun. And then she came. The thread described it in visceral terms. The sound of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon, that distinct BRRRT that signaled salvation. The way the A-10 Thunderbolt II came screaming over the ridgeline, low and aggressive, its nose pointing at the enemy positions like the finger of God. She made pass after pass, taking fire from multiple directions, hydraulic fluid streaming from her aircraft, one engine sputtering, but she never broke off. Not until every soldier was accounted for, not until medevac could land, not until the enemy was scattered or dead. He saved the thread, screenshotted the posts, and started cross-referencing. Outpost Restrepo was real, famously documented in books and films about the war. The dates matched. And if this woman, this Ghost Rider, had been the pilot that day, then those F-22 pilots weren't just saluting a veteran. They were saluting a hero. He spent the rest of the day digging deeper, calling contacts in the military journalism world, searching declassified after-action reports. Most of it was redacted or classified, but he found enough to confirm the basics. An A-10 pilot, female, attached to the 74th Fighter Squadron, had indeed flown close air support missions in Korengal during that period. Her name was withheld in most documents, standard procedure for operational security, but her call sign appeared twice, Ghost Rider. By the time he arrived at the Veterans Memorial Park the next afternoon, he had pages of notes, a dozen questions, and a recorder with fresh batteries. The park was quiet, a sprawling green space dotted with monuments and benches, flags snapping in the breeze. He found her sitting on a bench near the main memorial, hands folded, staring at the names etched into black granite. She wore jeans, a plain gray shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low. The jacket was gone, but he recognized her immediately. He approached slowly, gave her space. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. She nodded toward the bench beside her. He sat. For a long moment neither spoke. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine and cut grass. Somewhere nearby, children played, their laughter distant and bright. "You read about Korengal," she said. It wasn't a question. "Some," he admitted. "Not enough. The details are scarce." "That's intentional." She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands clasped. The military doesn't like talking about close calls, makes command look bad, makes politicians nervous. Easier to classify it, bury it, move on. But you were there. I was there. He pressed record on the device, set it on the bench between them. She glanced at it, then at him, and something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but close. Resignation, maybe, acceptance. My name is Major Eliza Kine, she said. Retired. I flew A-10 Warthogs for 8 years, deployed 3 times. Korangal was my second tour. June 14, 2011 was supposed to be a milk run. Close air support for a routine patrol out of Restrepo. Nothing special. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the undercurrent, the way she was pulling the memories up from some deep place she usually kept locked. The patrol got hit 2 clicks from base. Ambush. RPGs, heavy machine guns, coordinated fire from elevated positions. They were pinned down, taking casualties. The radio chatter was chaos, panic. You could hear it in their voices. She paused, eyes distant. I was 20 minutes out when the call came. My wingman and I pushed the throttles, went full speed, but even at max, an A-10 isn't fast. It's built for loiter time, not sprint speed. Those 20 minutes felt like hours. He didn't interrupt. This was her story, her pace. When we got there, the situation was worse than the radio made it sound. The patrol was pinned in a dry riverbed, no cover, taking fire from 3 sides. I could see the muzzle flashes from the ridgeline, see the smoke from the RPGs. My wingman took the western ridge. I went after the north and east. She closed her eyes and he saw her jaw tight. First pass, I lit up the northern position. 30mm rounds, high explosive incendiary. The GAU-8 is a monster. When it fires, the whole plane shudders. You can feel it in your teeth. I walked the rounds right through their position, watched the tracers chew up the rocks and dirt. Then I pulled up hard and repositioned for the eastern ridge. That's when they hit me. Her voice dropped, quieter now. 14.5mm rounds, heavy machine gun, probably a DSHK. I felt the impacts, heard the alarms. Hydraulic pressure dropping, engine temperature spiking. The plane wanted to roll left, but I fought it, kept it level. I had to. Those soldiers didn't have anyone else. He realized he was holding his breath. How bad was the damage? Bad enough. Lost hydraulics in the right system, took hits to the engine cowling, and 1 round punched through the canopy 6 inches from my head. I could feel the wind screaming through the hole. She opened her eyes, looked at him directly. But the A-10 is built to take punishment. That's the whole point. So I kept flying, made another pass, then another. My wingman was doing the same on his side, but the enemy kept firing. They knew if they could take us out, the patrol was finished, so they focused everything on us. I stayed on station for 43 minutes, longest 43 minutes of my life. Burned through all my cannon rounds, dropped both Mavericks, used everything I had. My wingman ran dry and had to break off for refuel. I should have gone with him, standard procedure, but I could still hear the guys on the ground screaming for support, so I stayed. With no weapons, she confirmed. I made dry passes, just flew over their positions low and loud, trying to suppress them with noise and fear. It worked mostly. Bought enough time for the medevac to get in, for the patrol to pull back. She reached up, touched her jaw where the scar was. Took another hit on my last pass. Round came through the canopy again, this time caught me. Felt like getting hit with a hammer, blacked out for a second. When I came to, the plane was inverted, dropping fast. I pulled out maybe 500 feet above the valley floor. He stared at her, unable to process the casual way she described nearly dying. How did you make it back? Barely. Flew on 1 engine, no hydraulics, manual reversion. The base thought I was going to punch out, but I refused. If I lost the plane, that was 1 less asset for the next patrol, the next ambush. So I brought her home. Landed with no brakes, no steering, just momentum and prayer. Slid off the runway into the dirt. They had to cut me out of the cockpit. She smiled then, a real one this time, but it was edged with something dark. The plane was totaled, scrapped for parts, but the patrol made it back, all of them, not a single KIA. He let the silence sit for a moment, the weight of what she'd just told him settling in. And the call sign, Ghost Rider, she looked back at the memorial, at the names. Started as a joke. Someone said I flew like a ghost, appearing out of nowhere when things got bad, disappearing just as fast. It stuck. But after Korangal, it meant something different. Soldiers started requesting me by name. Ghost Rider, the pilot who wouldn't quit, who'd fly through hell to bring them home. It became bigger than me. And the salute on the plane, she nodded slowly. Word gets around. Fighter pilots were a small community. Those F-22 jockeys, they knew the story. Probably flew with guys who were at Korangal or heard it secondhand. The salute was their way of saying they remembered, that what I did mattered. The wind picked up, rustling the flags above them. He watched her, this woman who'd been mocked by passengers who had no idea who she was, who'd sat in silence while two fighter jets honored her in the sky. "Why retire?" he asked. "After all that, why leave?" Her expression darkened. "Because I couldn't stop seeing it. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that cockpit, hearing the alarms, feeling the plane shudder. I did 3 more deployments after Korangal, flew dozens of missions, but that day never left me. It was always there, waiting." She touched the scar again unconsciously. "I started making mistakes, small ones at first, but mistakes nonetheless. And in aviation, mistakes kill people, so I walked away before I became a liability, before I got someone killed because I was too broken to see straight." "That doesn't sound broken," he said quietly. "That sounds like courage." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Courage is staying when you're scared. What I did was run. There's a difference." "Is there?" She didn't answer. They sat in silence, watching the park around them. Families walking, dogs, joggers passing by, the mundane flow of civilian life that felt 1,000 miles from the story she'd just told. Finally, she stood. "That's the story. That's Ghost Rider. Do with it what you want." He stood too, turned off the recorder. "What do you want me to do with it?" She considered that, looking up at the sky. It was clear and blue, the kind of sky pilots dream about. "Tell people what close air support means. Tell them about the pilots who fly low and slow, who take the hits so someone else doesn't have to. Tell them about the soldiers who call for help and the voices that answer. That's the story, not me." "You are the story," he said. "You're the voice that answered." She met his eyes, and for the first time he saw something unguarded there. Vulnerability. Maybe even gratitude. "Then tell it right," she said. "No hero worship, no propaganda, just the truth, the fear, the adrenaline, the impossible choices, all of it." "I will." She nodded, started to walk away, then paused. "And if you're going to use my name, use the rank. Major Eliza Kine, Coulson Ghost Rider. I earned that rank. People should know it." "Yes, ma'am." She almost smiled at that, then disappeared into the park, leaving him standing there with a recorder full of her words and a story that suddenly felt sacred. He didn't know it then, but that conversation would change both their lives. The article took him 3 weeks to write. He agonized over every word, every detail, trying to capture not just what Major Kine had done, but what it meant. The fear and the courage, the split-second decisions that meant life or death, the toll it took on someone to fly through hell and come back changed. He interviewed soldiers who'd been at Korangal, tracked down her wingman, found the maintenance crew who'd scraped her A-10 off the runway. Each conversation added layers, depth, context. And every single person said the same thing: "She saved our lives." When the article finally published, he expected moderate interest. Maybe a few shares on social media, some comments from veterans. What he got was a firestorm. Within 24 hours, the piece had gone viral. Major news outlets picked it up. Veterans groups shared it relentlessly. The hashtag Ghostwriter trended for 3 days. People who'd never heard of close air support were suddenly learning about the A-10 Warthog, about the pilots who flew them, about the missions nobody talked about. And Major Eliza Kine, who'd wanted to disappear into civilian life, became a household name. His phone rang constantly. Interview requests, book deals, film options. He forwarded them all to her, unsure if she'd even respond. She didn't, not at first. Then 2 weeks after publication, he got a text from an unknown number. "You told it right, thank you." That was all. But it was enough. Months passed. The story's viral moment faded, as these things do, but the impact lingered. The Air Force quietly reinstated a program for A-10 close air support training that had been on the chopping block. Veterans organizations saw a surge in donations. And Major Kine, despite her best efforts to remain anonymous, became a symbol. Of war, but of the people who fight them and the cost they pay. He didn't hear from her again until almost a year later, when she called him out of nowhere on a Tuesday morning. "I need a favor," she said without preamble. "I'm speaking at a ceremony, medal presentation for some of the soldiers from Koringal. I don't know what to say." He was surprised she'd ask. "You're the most articulate person I've ever interviewed. You'll be fine." "I'm articulate when it's past tense, when it's over. This is present tense. These are guys who were there who remember. I don't know how to face that." He understood then. It wasn't about the words. It was about standing in front of the people whose lives she'd saved and accepting their gratitude, their respect. For someone like her, that was harder than flying through enemy fire. The ceremony was held at a small base outside Colorado Springs, nothing elaborate. Just a handful of soldiers, their families, a few officers, and Major Kine. He sat in the back, watching as the names were called, as medals were pinned to uniforms. When it was her turn to speak, the room went silent. She stood at the podium, hands gripping the edges, and for a moment he thought she might not be able to do it. Then she looked up, met the eyes of the soldiers in the front row, and spoke. "I'm not good at this," she started, her voice steady but quiet. "I'm better in a cockpit than in front of people, but I need to say something and I need you to hear it." She took a breath. "People call me a hero. They write articles, make me into something bigger than I am, but I'm not the hero of Koringal. You are. The soldiers who held that line, who called for help and then kept fighting while I was 20 minutes out. The medics who ran through fire to pull wounded men to safety. The medevac pilots who landed under enemy fire because someone needed them. You're the heroes. I just did my job." One of the soldiers in the front row, a staff sergeant with a prosthetic leg, shook his head. "Ma'am, respectfully, you saved our lives. You took hits that should have killed you and kept flying. That's more than just doing your job." She smiled, but her eyes were wet. "Maybe, but here's what I need you to understand. When I was up there getting shot to pieces, I wasn't thinking about heroism or medals or any of that. I was thinking about you, about the voices on the radio, scared and desperate, needing someone to answer. That's all it was, just answering the call." She paused, her voice breaking slightly. "And I'd do it again, every time, because that's what we do. We answer. We show up when it's hard, when it's impossible, when every instinct says to run. We show up because someone needs us. That's the only thing that matters." The room erupted in applause. Not polite ceremony applause, but the real kind, the kind that comes from the chest, from gratitude and respect and something deeper. She stood there, overwhelmed, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw her cry. Not sobs, just tears tracking down her face, silent and unstoppable. After the ceremony, the soldiers lined up to thank her. One by one, they shook her hand, hugged her, told her their stories. She listened to each one, really listened, and he could see the weight lifting from her shoulders with every conversation. This was what she needed. Not articles or fame or recognition from strangers, just this. The knowledge that what she'd done had mattered to the people who mattered most. He waited until the crowd thinned, then approached. "You did good up there," he said. She wiped her eyes, laughed. "I cried in front of a room full of soldiers. That's not good, that's embarrassing." "That's human," he corrected. "And they needed to see it, needed to know you're real, not some myth." She looked at him, something shifting in her expression. "I'm going back," she said, "back to flying, not military, but I got an offer from a contractor, training pilots in close air support tactics, teaching the next generation how to do what I did, but better, safer." He felt a surge of something, pride, maybe, or relief. "That's incredible. When do you start?" "Next month." "It's going to be strange, being back in that world without the uniform, but it feels right. Like I've been in limbo and finally found solid ground." "You deserve that." She nodded, then reached into her jacket and pulled out a patch. The same one he'd seen that night on the plane. Wings, a lightning bolt, and the words "Ghost Rider" stitched in gold. She handed it to him. "For the article, for telling the story, and for reminding me that running isn't the same as surviving." He took it, felt the weight of the fabric, the history sewn into every thread. "I'll keep it safe." "I know you will." She started to leave, then turned back. "One more thing, those F-22 pilots, I found out who they were, sent them a message. They're good guys. Turns out one of them was in Koringal, different unit, different day, but he remembered hearing about Ghost Rider on the radio. Said it was the most reassuring sound he'd ever heard." "What did you tell them?" "I thanked them. For the salute, for the respect. And I told them I hoped I never had to answer their call, because if they're calling, it means something's gone very wrong. But if they do, I'll be there." That was Major Eliza Kine in a sentence. Always ready, always willing, always there when it mattered. He watched her walk away, back straight, head high, and thought about how many people in that terminal, in the sky, in the world, had no idea what she'd done, what she'd sacrificed. But the people who needed to know, they knew. And that was enough. The story didn't end there. Over the years, Ghost Rider became more than a call sign. It became a teaching tool, a case study in courage and tactical excellence. Pilots learned her name in training, studied her decisions, tried to emulate her calm under fire. The A-10 community, always fiercely protective of their aircraft and their mission, held her up as proof that close air support mattered, that low and slow could save lives in ways fast movers never could. And Major Kine trained them, one class at a time, passing on the lessons she'd learned in blood and fire. One day, 5 years after that first meeting, he got an invitation, a reunion at Coringal, or what was left of it. The base was long abandoned, but the soldiers who'd been there were gathering to commemorate the anniversary, to remember the fallen and honor the survivors. Major Kine had asked him to come, to document it, to close the circle. He flew to Bagram, then took a helicopter into the valley. The landscape was harsh and beautiful, mountains rising like broken teeth against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The outpost was a ruin, walls crumbling, concertina wire rusted and sagging. But the soldiers were there, 24 of them, older now, grayer but unmistakable in the way they carried themselves. And Major Kine stood among them, no longer separate, no longer haunted. She'd found her peace, and it showed. The ceremony was simple. A chaplain said a few words. Names were read. And then one by one the soldiers shared their stories, what they remembered, who they'd lost, how they'd survived. When Major Kine spoke, her voice was strong. "I came here thinking I needed closure," she said. "But what I realized is that closure isn't forgetting. It's remembering and choosing to move forward anyway. This valley took something from all of us, but it also gave us something: brotherhood, purpose. The knowledge that when everything falls apart, we can still find the strength to hold the line." She gestured to the sky. "There's a new generation of pilots learning to fly now, learning to answer the call. And I tell every one of them about this place, about you, about what it means to show up when it matters. That's my mission now. Not to forget, but to make sure no one else does either." The group stood in silence, the wind moving through the valley like a prayer. Then, from somewhere distant, came the sound of engines, low and guttural, growing louder. An A-10 Warthog appeared over the ridge, painted in desert camouflage, flying low and fast. It made a single pass over the ruins, wings waggling in salute, then pulled up and disappeared into the sun. Someone had arranged it, a tribute from the Air Force. And as the sound faded, the soldiers raised their hands in salute, holding it until the silence returned. Major Kine stood among them, tears streaming down her face, but this time they were different. Not grief or guilt, but something closer to peace, gratitude, acceptance. She'd answered the call, and now, finally, she could rest. Years later, when he published the book, a comprehensive account of close air support in modern warfare, with Ghost Rider's story as its centerpiece, he dedicated it to her. Not to Major Eliza Kine, retired, but to Ghost Rider, still flying in the memories of the soldiers she saved. The book became required reading at the Air Force Academy. Students studied her tactics, her decisions, the way she'd balanced aggression with restraint, courage with caution. And somewhere in every class, a young pilot would ask the same question: "Is she real? Did it really happen?" And the instructors would nod and say, "She's real. And what she did is the standard we all aspire to." Major Kine never read the book, or so she claimed. But he knew better. He'd seen the copy on her shelf, dog-eared and annotated, proof that even heroes need reminding of their own strength. She continued training pilots year after year, refining the curriculum, pushing her students harder than anyone else. And they loved her for it, because they knew that when she critiqued their flying, when she demanded more, it wasn't ego. It was experience. It was the knowledge that one day those skills would mean the difference between life and death for someone on the ground. And she refused to let anyone graduate unprepared. One of her students, a young lieutenant named Ramirez, once asked her, "Do you ever miss it? The combat, the adrenaline?" She'd thought about it, really considered the question. "I miss knowing I made a difference," she said finally. "I miss the clarity of purpose, but I don't miss the fear, and I don't miss watching good people die because we couldn't get there fast enough." "Do you think we're ready for that?" She looked at him, saw the uncertainty in his eyes, and nodded. "You'll never feel ready. No one does, but when the call comes, you'll answer, because that's who you are, that's why you're here." Ramirez deployed 6 months later. When his unit got ambushed outside Kandahar, he called for close air support and flew his A-10 through the same kind of hell Ghost Rider had faced years before. He took hits, stayed on station, brought everyone home. And when he returned, the first person he called was Major Kine. "I did it," he said, his voice shaking. "I answered the call." "I know," she said quietly. "I'm proud of you. I thought of you up there. When it got bad, I thought, Ghost Rider did this, I can too." She smiled, though he couldn't see it. "That's the point, Lieutenant, to show the next generation that it's possible. That courage isn't the absence of fear, it's flying anyway." The story of Ghost Rider spread beyond the military. Civilian pilots heard it, journalists wrote about it, filmmakers tried to option it, but Major Kine turned them all down. She didn't want a movie, didn't want her face on a poster. She wanted the mission to matter, not the person. "The moment it becomes about me," she told him once, "is the moment it stops being about the soldiers, and they're the ones who matter." He understood, even if Hollywood didn't. Because the real story wasn't about one pilot's heroism. It was about a system, a culture, a commitment to never leaving anyone behind. Ghost Rider was just the most visible example of something that happened every day in every war by pilots and soldiers and medics whose names would never be known. And that was fine. That was how it should be. But for the people who knew, for the soldiers she'd saved and the pilots she'd trained, she would always be more than a name or a call sign. She would always be the voice that answered when hope was gone, the shadow in the sky that meant salvation, the proof that even in the darkest moments someone would come. On her 60th birthday, the Air Force threw her a surprise party at the training base. Pilots from 3 decades of service showed up, some flying in from across the country. There were speeches and toasts, stories and laughter. And at the end, they presented her with a gift, a restored canopy section from her A-10, the one that had been shot through at Korangal. It was mounted on a plaque, the bullet holes still visible, and beneath it a single line, "Through fire and fear, Ghost Rider flies." She stood there staring at it, and for a moment she was back in that cockpit, alarms blaring, wind screaming through the holes, the valley sprawling below her like an open wound. But this time the memory didn't hurt. It grounded her. Reminded her of who she was, what she'd done, and why it mattered. She looked around the room at the faces of her students, her fellow pilots, the soldiers who'd come to thank her, and she realized something she'd been too broken to see before. She wasn't alone. She'd never been alone. Every mission, every flight, every impossible moment, she'd been part of something bigger. A chain of people who refused to quit, who answered the call no matter the cost. And that chain was unbreakable. She raised her glass. "To the mission," she said. "To the call and the answer. And to everyone who flies into the fire so someone else doesn't have to." The room erupted in cheers, glasses clinking, voices raised in a toast that echoed through the hangar. And in that moment, surrounded by the people who understood, Major Eliza Kine finally let go of the weight she'd carried for so long. She was home. She was whole. And Ghost Rider, wherever she flew, would always be ready. The journalist, now older himself, sat in the back of that hangar and watched the celebration with a quiet satisfaction. He told her story, given it wings, but the story had always been bigger than him, bigger than any article or book. It lived in the hearts of the people she'd saved, the pilots she'd trained, the mission she'd embodied, and it would outlive them all. Later that night, after the party had wound down and most people had left, he found her standing outside, looking up at the stars. The sky was clear and vast, the kind of night where you could see every constellation, every distant light. "Quite a turnout," he said, joining her. She nodded. "More than I expected, more than I deserved." "You deserve all of it and more," she smiled, but didn't argue. She'd learned to accept gratitude even if it still felt foreign. "You know what the strangest part is?" she asked. "What?" "That night on the plane, when those F-22s saluted me, I thought my story was over. That I was just a washed-up pilot trying to disappear. But it wasn't over, it was just beginning." "How so?" She gestured to the hangar behind them where her students trained, where the legacy continued. Because it's not about one mission or one pilot, it's about the idea, the belief that no one gets left behind, that someone will always answer the call. That's what those pilots saluted, not me, the mission. He considered that, saw the truth in it. And the mission continues. Always. They stood in comfortable silence, two people who'd shared a story that had changed both their lives. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of jet fuel and earth, and somewhere in the distance an aircraft engine roared to life. The sound of readiness, the sound of purpose. Major Eliza Kine listened to it, let it wash over her, and felt at peace. Because as long as that sound existed, as long as pilots trained and answered the call, Ghost Rider would fly. Not as a person, but as a promise. And promises, when made by people like her, were never broken. The journalist left that night with one final image. Major Kine standing beneath the stars, her face turned skyward, a faint smile on her lips. She looked lighter, unburdened, as if she'd finally set down something heavy and realized she didn't need to pick it up again. He never wrote another word about her after that. The story was complete. But sometimes when he heard the sound of jets overhead, he'd stop and look up, remembering the woman in seat 24A who'd carried the weight of a war in silence, who'd been saluted by the sky and honored by the people who mattered most. And he'd think, some stories don't need endings. They just need to be told. Ghost Rider's story was one of those. Infinite, enduring, and always, always flying.